in about a few seconds from now. Okay, we're live.
Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Richard Foote, and I'm the chair of the Licensing Committee. It's now 5 p.m, so I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of Hounslow's Licensing Committee, which is only the second virtual meeting of the London Borough of Hounslow. I would like to welcome the members of the committee who are sitting this evening, as well as council officers who will be assisting members throughout the meeting. In addition, I would also like to welcome members of the public who are watching this meeting from home. As you may all know, until recently, virtual meetings for council business were not legal, but as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and the quarantine arrangements required by government, the law has recently been changed to let local authorities meet in a virtual way to make decisions. Therefore, this meeting is taking place using the recently introduced government regulations. The way this meeting will work will be that as chair, I will be running the meeting and inviting people to speak. As it is very easy for people to speak over each other in a meeting like this, I will ask each member or officer to speak in turn at the appropriate stage, and everyone will have a chance. This will mean that there should normally be no need for people to interrupt or ask to speak. However, if a member does have an urgent reason to interject, for example, a point of order, please do so by turning your microphone on and telling me that you wish to interject. The exception to this will be the legal committee or licensing officers who may turn on their microphone to alert me to any legal governance or licensing issues that needs addressing, although I would expect this to be a rare occurrence. In addition, we have a producer of the meeting from our ICT department who may also contact me if necessary, but I think it is unlikely if all goes well, as I hope it will. The etiquette for members of the committee and for officers who are expecting to speak will be to mute your microphones until you're asked to speak. This means that only one person will be speaking at a time and there will be no background noise, making it easier for us to follow the meeting and also for those watching at home. I would also like to ask members always to say who they are when making their contribution and to speak slowly and clearly for the same reason. We have 6 members of the licensing committee here with us this evening, and it's we who will be making the decisions. Officers of the council will provide assistance and advice as required, but the final decision will be made by members. I would like to introduce all of the members here tonight one by one. I will start with myself. My name is Councillor Richard Foote. I'm chair of this committee and I'm also a ward councillor for Hanworth Ward. I would now like to ask each member to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Councillor Unsa Chowdhury.
Hello, I'm Councillor Unsa Chowdhury and I'm the ward member for Austin Spring Grove.
Right, we can see you now. I'm not quite sure whether everybody saw you at the time you were speaking. And so anyway, I'll move on to Gabriella Giles. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chair. I am Councillor Gabriella Giles and I am one of the councillors for Chiswick Riverside.
And now to Councillor Vikram Garewal.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Vikram Garewal from the Hounslow Heath Ward and a member of this panel.
And now to Councillor Rajvinder Sidhu.
Hello, my name is Rajvinder Sidhu. I'm a councillor from Bedford Ward.
Right, we can see you. I think you may have some problems with your background, Councillor Sidhu, because the side of your head appears to have disappeared. I don't know whether our technical people can do anything about that. But in the meantime, I'm sorry, go on, is that somebody who's speaking? No, I'll move on to Councillor Karen Smith for the time being.
Hello, I'm Councillor Karen Smith and I represent Hounslow South Ward.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Can I also say I believe we've got Councillor Catherine Dunn sitting in as an observer and in her role as the lead member, which covers licensing. Although she won't be taking part in the licensing committee meeting, she's not actually a member of the licensing committee. I would also like to invite the officers who we're expecting to speak at this meeting, and in turn, so I ask Vicky Wallace, the Assistant Director, to introduce herself.
Good evening. My name is Vicky Wallace and I'm the Assistant Director for Community Enforcement and Regulatory Services.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I also call upon Andrew Devine to introduce himself? Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Andrew Devine. I'm the Regulatory Manager for Community Standards.
Vicky, do we have our consultant with us? Yeah, I'm just looking down the list quickly. Yes, he is here, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes. Would you like to introduce
Yes,
Ali?
Yes, Councillor. Yes, Alistair Turnham is with us tonight and will be taking part in part of the presentation. And Alistair Turnham is from Make Associates and he's carried out the research that has been carried out to inform the cumulative impact assessment. Ali, if you'd like to say a few words.
Hi, thank you, Vicky. I'm Alistair Turnham. I'm the independent specialist in licensing, and as Vicky says, I've been working on the cumulative impact assessment and also supporting in drafting the new licensing policy. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you all. We also have officers acting in a producing role for the technical side of this meeting, but as they are not expected to be involved in the discussions of the meeting, I will thank them now for their help, but will not ask them to introduce themselves. Right, if we can go to further information. I don't, members, have you muted your microphones? It looks like they're all muted. Well done. Members of the public are reminded that the agenda and all of the reports being considered by the committee tonight can be found on the council website under the Licensing Committee meetings page. So if you want to see them, that's where to look. You just log on to the London Borough of Hounslow and seek committees and then find the Licensing Committee, and under that you will be able to access the document. I also want to make sure that all members have their agenda and reports. Please speak now if you've not got them. They all had them last night. No.
Chair, this is Baljeet Verdi.
Yes, Benji.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I just thought it might be useful for myself and the governance officers who were also on the meeting to introduce themselves.
Yes, you're right. That's what we pay you the big bucks for, to remind me when I make a mistake. Yes, I don't know why I missed that out, but right. Yes, anyway, introduce yourself, please, Baljeet. Then we got Kay Duffy and Jyoti as well. Yeah.
Good evening, my name is Mr. Baljeet Verdi from HB Public Law, and I am the legal advisor to tonight's committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Baljeet. And Kay, are you there? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm Kay Duffy from Democratic Services, one of the officers supporting tonight's meeting.
And Jyoti, are you there? I know I can see you on the list.
You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah.
Hello, yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Jyoti Patel. I'm also from Democratic Services, supporting the meeting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It wasn't deliberate me leaving you out, and I apologise. I skipped a paragraph. Right. Can I? Right, picked up now. Let's see now. Right. I'd like to remind members of the need to hear all of the evidence in each report we are considering tonight. This means that you should listen to the whole debate. Please do not pop out to make tea or walk the dog. This is a legal requirement. I will be asking you to confirm that you have heard all of the debates before you vote on any matter this evening. If you should find that you're having technical problems and need to log out of the meeting and come back in again, please let me know immediately, ideally beforehand, but if not, afterwards by turning on your microphone. This would be a permitted interruption. We can then decide how far we need to either recap if that's necessary, or if the member needs to not vote on that item. Finally, I'd like to say to any member of the public listening or watching, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope this meeting will go well, but it's the first time the Licensing Committee has been running this way. We would ask you to bear with us if there are any hitches. Thank you. We'll now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is agenda item 1, apologies for absent. We would usually have a much larger number of members sitting on the Licensing Committee, but for virtual meetings, we have concluded it would be much better to have a smaller number of members. So apart from myself, other members of the committee will be attending virtual meetings on a rota basis in accordance with political proportionality. Those members of the committee who are not with us this evening and therefore have no role in the outcome of today's discussions, only the members in the meeting today will decide the outcomes. This does not mean those members who are not here this evening are absent or need to send apologies, and they will not be marked down or on attendance lists maintained by the council. I will now ask if there are any apologies for the 6 members we're expected, but I can still see all your names there. So I'm going to assume you are all still with us. The quorum for this committee tonight is 4, and we have achieved that with all 6, so we can proceed with the meeting from now. Can I also ask at this time if there are any declarations of interest or other communications that members wish to make? None? Okay. So I'm going to move now to further information. Right, can you all mute your microphones again? Right, I'm moving on. I've turned the wrong page. Right, in fact, we're now on agenda item 2. No, we're taking that. Which is the minutes of the last meeting of the committee held on the 31st of July 2019. So I'm afraid that does probably seem like coming from another world. It seems so long ago. I intend to do both corrections for accuracy and matters arising together. May I ask members if they have any corrections they wish to propose? Please speak now if you wish to do so. No? Then I take it that there are no corrections to be made. Can I now ask the members to agree with the minutes? Right. Thank you. I'd not usually now sign a physical copy of the minutes, but as this is currently impractical, I shall ask the committee officer to ensure that I'm provided with a paper copy to sign either by post or when it is possible to attend Hounslow House. In the meantime, the minutes will formally record that we have agreed the minutes as a correct record of the last meeting. We now move on to licensing reports for decision. Where we need to to time contributions, I will ask the legal officer to alert me to when allocated timings have been reached. Members have 5 minutes each to make their contributions during the debates. I'll also ask our legal representative to alert me prior to the guillotine being reached if we've not concluded the meeting by that time. May I remind all members and officers to introduce themselves when they speak, and also to mute their microphones when they've finished speaking. It's also important to speak slowly and clearly so that everyone can understand what you're saying. Finally, if you're making reference to any agenda documentation, please give the page and the paragraph details. This will help those members of the public to find exactly where we are and what we're talking about. So we're currently on page 4, looking at item 3, the Licence Committee Terms of Reference. So I'm going to ask Vicky to introduce this report.
Good evening, councillors. I would like to introduce the report on page 4 of the committee agenda, the review of the Licensing Committee Terms of Reference. The Terms of Reference for the Licensing Committee should set out the conditions, the functions of the committee and its responsibilities, and include the legislation for which the committee is responsible. These terms of reference form part of the council's constitution and as such must be reviewed to ensure they remain current. Officers have reviewed the existing terms of reference and have made some changes to better meet the requirements of the Licensing Act. If you could turn to page 1 of the report, on page 9 of the agenda, you will find the revised terms of reference. You will see that the Licensing Committee is responsible, on behalf of the Council, for developing and reviewing the licensing policies and also discharging the licensing functions for the Council. We then go into a bit more detail. If you see on paragraph 2, this establishes the number of members who can sit on the committee. Paragraph 6 talks about the establishment of a subcommittee or the licensing panels which carry out the licensing functions. And paragraph 8 looks at the delegation of some of the functions to officers to carry out. If you turn to page 10, in section B, this lists the legislation for which the Licensing Committee is responsible for dealing with. This will include the Licensing Act, the Gambling Act, special treatments, and even zoo licensing. On page 11, section C, this covers the licensing panel responsibilities. So this covers the cases where a representation has been made against an application and will come before a panel for consideration. And if you turn to page 12, section D covers the functions which are delegated to officers. And these are the officers who process the licence applications, and they can also approve a licence where there are no objections. So if I could take you back to page 5 of the report, we need to update the terms of reference to clarify the Licensing Committee's functions and responsibilities under the relevant legislation so as to remove any risk of challenge. On page 6, in paragraph 6.4, I would like to draw to your attention that the approval for the terms of reference is reserved to the Borough Council, and upon your agreement at this committee, the terms of reference will be referred to the first available meeting of the Council. I therefore ask you to agree the terms of reference and refer them to the Borough Council for approval. Thank you.
Unmute. Thank you, Vicky. Right, members, I'm going to go down. So you're being asked to approve the new functions and to forward them to the council for for confirmation. So I'm asking you, I'll call you out one by one. If you could introduce yourself and say whether you're for, against, or you're abstaining. So firstly, I go to Councillor Unsa Chowdhury.
Hello, I'm Unsa Chowdhury from Austin Spring Grove ward, and I am for that. Thank you.
Councillor Foote, could I ask if members have any questions about the report?
Sorry, you're right. I'm jumping paragraphs again. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll go back to you, Unsa. Do you have any questions?
I did have a question on a clarification as to why it's 15 members only as a maximum, and if that took into consideration the changes of the number of councillors that's going to be in a couple of years' time.
Right. Well, the number of councillors. Oh. So the number of councillors which are specified in the terms of reference are as it is specified in the Licensing Act, which gives us a minimum number and a maximum number. So we meet that requirement. Now, if in future numbers change, then if the legislation that we're working to at the moment is updated, then I would envisage that we would then need to update our numbers as well. So that is something that would need to be kept in mind. And we get guidance around the Licensing Act, the Section 182 guidance. So we will need to keep an eye on that in case we get further advice about numbers that will change.
Okay.
Sorry.
What's our number that we agreed? I know the minimum is 10 and the maximum is
15.
15. Where are we at actually? We're on the max. We actually have 15 members of the committee. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I think we have an election that comes in before all of that, so I don't know whether we'd be around to be able to make those decisions then. Right, anyway, can I move on? Councillor Gabriella Giles, do you have any questions?
One more question.
Sorry, Unsa, yeah.
Thank you. My question was relating to delegated powers, so delegating to officers. Is there some, can you offer us a bit more guidance on that and how and when that would work?
Right, so at the moment...
Sorry, you broke up at the end of your speaking then, and so I got as far as, I thought you said when that elapsed.
Sorry. So
I'm sorry, did you hear the whole question, Vicky?
I think the question is around the use of delegated powers for officers. Is that right, Councillor Chowdhury?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, right, okay. So in terms of the delegated powers, this is where we have the licensing committee has the overall powers, which then get delegated to the licensing panels or the subcommittee. And then where we say have applications which are unopposed, and we do get a lot of them, then these are the ones which are delegated to the officers. So where we have something which is not controversial, where there is no opposition to it, then officers can carry out that licensing function as a delegated power. But however, if we do get any application where it's contested in any way, or if it's something that officers feel there's a certain sensitivity or controversy around it, then we will make sure that it comes up to the licensing committee. And so the terms of reference are written in such a way that there can be there will be sections where there can be joint powers between a delegated between what is delegated to officers and what a licensing panel can consider, so we can have something that will come in, and where we then see it is contested, we can refer it on to a panel for consideration.
Thank you. And
yeah, go on, sir.
I'm waiting for the camera to be on me.
Well, I can see you.
I just wanted to check that this doesn't prevent councillors from calling anything in should they think that actually this decision needs to come to a committee. So officers still, councillors still have the right to bring things to committee or not?
Yes, I just want to pull up. There is a in the report itself, in the appendix. We have. I'm just trying to locate it, but we, as I say, there is this kind of dual function. So if there was something that you did want to come to committee for, you know, for particular consideration, then we would be able to bring that to you.
Great, thank you. I think people will be really pleased to hear that as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Right, is that all? Excuse me, is that all, sir? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll call on Councillor Giles.
Thank you very much, Councillor Foote. Thank you, Victoria, for all of the work that you've done with expanding on the terms of reference that are included in our constitution. I was just wondering, under the Licensing Committee responsibilities, we've listed 10 acts or legislation that covers our responsibilities, which is actually very useful. Within these, are there particular parts that we need to be aware and conscious of? And is it worth highlighting these, or is it possible to include a hyperlink to where these legislations are actually kind of on the internet, so that they can be easily cross-referenced as and when a member will need to?
Right, well, I would suggest that the Licensing Acts and the Gambling Acts are the ones that you are going to see most frequently. Mm-hmm. In terms of actually having hyperlinks to them, I would need to understand with our Democratic Services whether we could actually have a hyperlink set in the terms of reference as they would be then incorporated into the Constitution. And if we can do, I'm sure that we would be able to do that. With respect to the other licenses which are listed there, I would say it'd be more exceptional circumstances that you would be having matters referred to you under them. But I mean, we can consider, you know, if we're able to have hyperlinks to the Licensing and Gambling Act, then I'm sure we would be able to have links for other ones. But where we would have acts which you don't see so frequently, then we would obviously need to make sure that we had suitable member training carried out, so that when your decision making was asked for, that you are aware of the issues that you need to be considering when you're at that panel meeting. Okay, yes. So as I say, we can look to get hyperlinks put into these if you need them.
Fantastic. Okay. And I think I sent you some other questions which have already been addressed in your earlier introduction. So thank you very much for those.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't unmute my microphone. Councillor Vikram Gariwal then next. Sorry, had you finished, Gabrielle?
Yes, I had, Councillor.
Oh, okay, I thought so.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, right. So, Vikram, have you any questions?
Thank you, Chair. It's Councillor Vikram Gariwal from Hounslow Heath Ward. I'll just like to say that my questions were already answered through Gabrielle and also Unsa. So from my perspective, I'm happy to support this item and I'm for it.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm now on Rajinder.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Rajinder
Thank you, Chair.
Sidhu.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Sidhu from Bedford. I have no questions, Chair. No questions, Chair. Thank you. I support the proposal.
Okay. And then I go to Councillor Karen Smith.
Okay, I'm Karen Smith from Hounslow South, and I have nothing to add to the questions already asked. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Karen. So I now go to myself. I've got one question really. When we talk about the Zoo Licensing Act, and I haven't seen it in the, I think, 4 years that I've been on the licensing panel ever coming up. But it was a question, does this cover I think the only one I know of is the animal farm that we have in Hounslow. That seems to be the nearest thing we have to zoos.
That's right. Yeah, I'm afraid we're not talking lions and tigers or anything, but no, it is the unit at the Hounslow farm. Yes, the urban farm.
Okay. So there is a license there.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That seems to be all I've got. Right. Right. Okay. So I now need a formal proposal to move and second the report. Can I ask any one of the councillors?
Chair, I'm happy to move the report.
Sorry,
I'm happy to second. This is Councillor Gabriella Giles.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to go through now and just ask you all to indicate whether you're for, against, or abstaining. So I'll go initially. And so, are you there?
I'm waiting for. Oh, there we go. The camera has now moved, and yes, I'm for. Thank you.
You're for. Okay. Thank you, Unsa. So now, Councillor Gabriella Giles, will you indicate whether you're for or against or abstaining?
Yes, I am Councillor Giles. I can confirm that I've been present for the whole of this debate on this item, and I vote to accept this this item on the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Vikram Grewal, can you confirm attendance and which way you're going to vote?
Thank you, Chair. This is Councillor Vikram Garwal. I can confirm that I've been here for the entirety of the debate and I'm for it.
Thank you. Councillor Rajinder Sidhu, can you also confirm your attendance throughout the debate and which way you will kind of vote?
I'm Councillor Raghavinder Sidhu. I confirm that I was present in the whole debate and I'm for the proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sidhu. And now on to Councillor Karen Smith. So can you confirm you were present and can you let me know which way you are voting?
I'm Councillor Karen Smith. I can confirm that I was present for the whole of the debate and I am for the proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. And finally, I confirm as Chair, Councillor Richard Foote, that I have been present for the whole debate and I'm voting for the report. So I declare that the outcome of the vote is that the report has been accepted unanimously. Can I thank everyone and move on to the next report, which is, it should be, agenda item 4, licensing policy. which is on pages 15 to 164. I'm presuming, again, Vicky, that you'll be the officer reporting on this, but with others coming into certain parts. I'm also assuming that with such a large number of pages that members have had the opportunity to go through and read them. I would point out that probably pages 58 to 126 is really evidential photographs showing some of the situations that we have in the area that we're looking at for cumulative impact policy. So anyway, I call upon Vicky to present the report.
Thank you, Councillor. In actual fact, this evening it will be presented by Andrew Devine, assisted by Alistair Turnham. So if I could actually turn to Andrew Devine rather than myself, that was where the report will be coming from. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know, unfortunately, I'm having a few internet issues at the moment, but hopefully you can all hear me clearly.
I think there have been a few problems around on volume.
So I would like to introduce the report on page 15 of the committee agenda, the review of the draft licensing committee, the review of the draft licensing policy. I'll be presenting the draft licensing policy, which is pages 22 to 47 of the report pack, along with Ali Turnham, who was introduced earlier from our licensing research consultants MAKE, who will discuss the cumulative impact assessment carried out on pages 50 to 125 with the cumulative impact map on page 126. From this point, obviously, any appendix referred to will be as part of the appendices following this document, with Appendix 1 being the draft statement of licensing policy 2020 to 2025. The Licensing Act requires that the Council review the licensing policy at least every 5 years, consulting the public on a draft licensing policy and making revisions to the policy as appropriate. Hounslow Statement of Licensing Policy 2020 to 2025 sets out the Council's legal duties under the Licensing Act and its approach to regulating licensed activities in the Borough. The policy provides guidance to new applicants, existing licence holders, residents and members, which provides consistency in decision making, builds on public confidence and assists in making Hounslow a safe and vibrant borough. For example, it offers residents who complain about public nuisance linked directly to licensed premises or their customers' behaviour potential additional protections, albeit ultimately limited by law. It offers residents who wish to obtain a personal licence, set up a licensed business, or who currently operate within the borough, or who themselves are licensees, increased clarity about what the council expects in their licence application and how it will also be assessed. As stated previously, the policy must be renewed at least every 5 years, and the current policy ends in November 2020. The draft licensing policy strengthens the link between the licensing and other council policies. It provides additional information for applicants, residents, members, and how the Licensing Act will be dealt with in Hounslow. Now, we obviously, as part of that strengthening the policy and those links, there are three particular areas has been focused on: creating a clearer, simpler policy, but with LP1 and LP3. The three key proposed changes, and these are summarised on page 25 of your report, which is page 4 of the draft licensing policy. One the first significant change is the revised and updated cumulative impact assessment, Appendix 2, which is pages 50 to 125, and an extended cumulative impact area shown in Appendix 3 on page 126, which includes the area of Heston. As stated above, part of this licensing review, our cumulative impact assessment has also been reviewed. This provides the evidence base to show where the cumulative impact of licensed premises have negatively affected the 4 licensing objectives. At this point, I would like to introduce Ali Turnham from Make Associates to talk to you about the cumulative impact assessment shown in Appendix 2 and the map of the proposed cumulative impact area in Appendix 3, and that is pages 50 to 125 and page 126 respectively. So I'd like to now pass over to Alistair Turnham from Make Associates.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll take you through, councillors, to the cumulative impact assessment. I won't go through it in extensive detail because obviously you'll have read it, but I'll summarise what it is and the new findings from this year's cumulative impact assessment. So a cumulative impact policy allows licensing committees and panels to take into account representations from local residents or interested parties and responsible authorities, including council officers, to the effect that there were already too many licensed premises in an area and they're impacting on one or more of the 4 licensing objectives negatively. Like 150 other councils, Hounslow has had its own cumulative impact policy since 2015, but only when the Licensing Act was modified in 2018 were cumulative impact policies put on a statutory footing under the Policing and Crime Act 2018. This introduced a formal requirement that they must be reviewed and supported by evidence in the form of a cumulative impact assessment. What does a cumulative impact policy mean in practice? Essentially, the presumption in favour of granting an application, which is embodied in the Licensing Act, is reversed in a cumulative impact policy area. And it would be incumbent upon the applicant for the licence to demonstrate that a licence would not add to existing problems, for example, of street drinking, alcohol-fueled antisocial behaviour, rather than for objectors, and perhaps residents, local ward councillors, businesses, to show that it would cause problems. And that's difficult to prove in practice and provides additional controls and restrictions where there is evidence of cumulative impact. At Make, we provided the evidence for the previous licensing policy and to decide whether there was still required a CIP in Hounslow and whether it should be changed in some way. We undertook an updated cumulative impact assessment for the council, and this can be found in the appendices as mentioned by Andrew earlier. The approach to the assessment and to the collection of data from the last policy changed slightly, and this involved mapping licenses by premises type, as you will see in there, pollution reports from the council, from the public to the council, and that includes reports of noise, litter, odours that can be linked to licensed premises or the clustering of licensed premises. Analysis of the borough survey of residents, their feelings of safety, crime and issues in their area related to licensed premises. Data of grot spots from Hounslow highways, and crucially observation work from the field, and that's the large number of photographs in your pack. This observation was undertaken by me personally over 4 days earlier this year, and I did the previous observation in 2015. We were looking at existing known hotspots for street drinking, noise nuisance and littering within the existing cumulative impact policy area, and that's between Hounslow West and Isleworth, as can be seen on the map on page 126, outlined in red. I went some way beyond the boundaries, the existing boundaries, to check if there had been any displacement from that area. So did we find hotspots outside of it since 2015? And broadly, as I will come to in the conclusions, we didn't find, apart from in Heston, serious problems beyond that boundary. The council has also received considerable evidence from Heston Action Group since the last policy was created. This was relating to problems that they perceived from off licences and street drinking in their area, as well as takeaway detritus on the street, which they say are a serious issue. To ensure that this was valid and the evidence presented to the council and Hounslow Highways on a regular basis over the last few years was genuine, I went to Heston to verify their own evidence and to see if we could find any additional evidence. So the headline findings from our cumulative impact assessment, and again, I won't go into too much detail, was that there are a number of clusters of off licenses and takeaways, in particular in the borough, many operating till very late at night. These are located particularly in central Hounslow, Brentford, some in Chiswick and Feltham, but also now in Heston, which for a small area has around 15 premises, which is unusually high for that sort of area. Overall, our observation work showed that there remains a high level of street drinking detritus, and there are presence of street drinkers around the area and takeaway litter in the existing cumulative impact area. This is reinforced by data from Hounslow Highways and from complaints directly to the council, which can be seen in the cumulative impact assessment report in your pack. Some of the previous sites where street drinking took place have now gone, for example, where development has taken place, for example, Morrison's over at Hounslow West. But there are actually now more sites for nuisance related to street drinking and takeaways than in 2015. There are 15 new sites, but only 8 seem to have disappeared where there were no street drinking. This is a net gain of at least 7 sites over the last 5 years. In terms of Heston, this was not in the CIP area previously, as noted, but we were able to verify all of 38 sites, as you'll see on some of the maps in the pack, that Heston Action Group had photographed and documented over the last few years, often with cleanups of huge numbers of bags of litter, drinking cans, bottles, etc. Some of those sites were currently cleaned by Hounslow Highways when we were there reviewing, but we also found 4 more sites that the group itself had not found. Overall, there were 42 sites of street drinking in Heston. In summary, the problems identified in 2015 in the previous CIP assessment continue in the borough, and there's now considerable evidence in our view that Heston has very severe problems. Some of the most severe is relating to street drinking detritus that I've seen in London, and I've worked in a number of boroughs across the city. But also we have issues around takeaway litter as well. It is for these reasons that it is proposed in the draft policy to retain the existing CIP area and to extend it to include the parts of Heston where those sites were found. As Andrew mentioned, that map can be found with the blue extended proposed boundary on page 126. Just before I conclude on this section, as members will know, the Council's public health team have been working extraordinarily hard to deal with the COVID crisis, and were unable to prepare their submission during the research period in time for committee regarding data on public health, alcohol, crime and domestic abuse. This has now been finalised, and as a responsible authority itself, Public Health will submit their report and data as part of the response to the consultation on this policy in due course, and that will be for the committee's consideration and for potential inclusion in support of the final policy. So that's my summary of the cumulative impact assessment, and I will pass you back now to Andrew, who will talk to you about the second major change around core hours in the policy.
Thank you, Alistair. The second key change is the introduction of core hours, which can be found on page 34 of the document. To give a brief overview of the core hours, this is in LP3, and it discusses core hours that we propose for Monday to Thursday 8 till 11 p.m, Friday and Saturday 8 till midnight.
Andrew, and I just asked you to go back over what you just said. You were breaking up in the middle of it, and I don't know, it's only me that didn't hear what you had said, but
no,
just
that's
in
fine.
Case, if you could just.
That's fine.
Thanks, Andrew.
Not a problem. So thank you, Alistair, for that. And I just wanted to, the second key point is the introduction of core hours information, which can be found on page 34 of your document. That is the LP3, Licensing Policy 3 core hours, and details of the core hours are found in the grey box on that page. And just to quickly run through, that is Monday to Thursday 8 till 11 p.m, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Friday and Saturday 8 a.m. till midnight, and Sunday 10 a.m. till 10:30. The council supports the principle of flexibility in its approach to licensing hours, and will consider the merits of each individual application and each individual application in its own merits. However, the council is also mindful that the borough is one of the most densely populated in the country, with large numbers of residential premises, often close to areas of commercial activity, as well as other mixed-use neighbourhoods. The council will therefore take the approach, or we're looking to take the approach, that to licensing hours that seeks to balance the needs of the licensing trade while protecting the residential amenity in order to promote the licensing objectives, the 4 licensing objectives. The hours are also based on the council's own experience and the licence authority's own experience since the commencement of the Act, as activities during these times are generally considered to be acceptable. It should be noted, however, just as Alistair was talking about the cumulative impact policy earlier, that this part of the policy does not apply to those who are making an application within the cumulative impact area. Now, from that, I'd like to pass back over to Alistair Turnham to talk about the model conditions at this point, which is our significant change number 3.
Thank you, Andrew. Hopefully the tag team is providing useful information for you councillors. We've got 2 more little presentations each, and then you'll be free of us and you can ask us questions. So I'm going to talk about model conditions, as Andrew said. The model conditions can be found on page 129 to 38, and there's an alphabetical index of them. It's 139 to 144. So I'll just go a little bit about conditions generally. I know you all know that, but just for the public who may be watching, and then what is significant about model conditions and why they are being suggested for proposal alongside this current licensing draft policy. Okay, so when deciding to grant or vary a premises license under the Licensing Act, the licensing authority, that's you, may do so subject to conditions that it considers necessary, proportionate and appropriate for the promotion of those 4 licensing objectives. Conditions can and should be tailored to the particular circumstances of each individual licensed premises. Model conditions have been successfully used in many boroughs, including high visibility ones such as Camden, Hackney and Lambeth, and they were pioneered in Westminster over probably 10 years ago. And so they've been tested as a useful way of helping applicants, residents, the police and you as licensing committee to tailor the conditions on each license to the circumstances of that application or variation. We should not consider these model conditions as standardised conditions to be automatically imposed, but rather these model conditions have been produced to assist all parties and to promote a consistent approach when proposing conditions for a premises licence. They're a useful starting point. The list is not exhaustive or restrictive and doesn't reduce the options to propose your own conditions as a licence applicant, or for you as a committee to suggest alternative conditions when deciding in committee or in negotiations with an applicant what would be best to promote the 4 licensing objectives. It should be noted that model conditions are separate to the licensing policy, and this is really important. They are not in the licensing policy, and they can be updated at any time separate to reviewing the licensing policy and do not require consulting on. We are only recommending consulting on them now, as this is the first time they would be proposed in Hounslow, and given that you're consulting on your licensing policy at the same time, it would be a useful opportunity to receive feedback on them from businesses and the public and responsible authorities. Finally, as noted above, there's an alphabetical index that accompanies them, so you can easily cross-reference them. So, for example, if you wanted to look at noise, perhaps you were thinking, I run a nightclub, I want to look at kind of what sort of conditions the council might be interested in applying if I'm going to protect residents against noise, then you can cross-reference against the 3 or 4 proposed model conditions in there that might be suitable to your application. So that's a little summary of model conditions, and I'll now pass back to Andrew to talk about consultation programme and questions that we are proposing for the licensing policy.
Thank you, Alistair. So I draw your attention to Appendix 5, which is pages 145 to 147 of the report pack. This lists our consultation questions that we would be looking to go out and consult on. The council has an internal mechanism for reviewing these consultations, and the proposed consultation has been identified as fit for purpose following this review. These questions in the consultation focus around the three key points of the updated cumulative impact assessment, which would be, as we've discussed, the core hours, the updated cumulative impact assessment, the core hours, and the model conditions. We will be consulting with the relevant audience as part of that we need to, and as part of this we are also in discussion with our communications department on how best to do get that information out there, and we've worked with them and drawn up an audience list of the people, including premises license holders and personal license holders, residents, etc., and the different forms of consultation that we can undertake as part of it. That's a very brief overview of the consultation and what we've done in that part. And the final part now I'd like to hand back over to Ali is to talk to you with regards to the equalities impact assessment, which can be found in Appendix 6.
Okay, thank you, councillors. I'll keep this as brief as possible. It's the last time from me. Hounslow takes its duties under the Equality Act 2010 very seriously, and as part of the preparation of that licensing policy, an equalities impact assessment was undertaken, and that involved myself and Andrew working with the council's equalities officer and the consultation panel. Because licensing policy is relatively restricted by legislation, there's limited room for the council to create local rules or decisions that are likely to affect the different, and it's called protected groups under the Equality Act 2010. I think that's quite an important point to make, which is that the Licensing Act is very prescriptive in many ways. So this isn't an opportunity for the council to go off piece and come up with a highly specialised local policy. Yes, it's tailored, but the approach is very much one that is based on the Licensing Act. And I think it's also worth mentioning in the whole context of this that ultimately the Licensing Act will always take precedence even over a local authority's licensing policy. Because licensing policy is relatively restricted, and we have relatively small room for imposing local conditions, an example of this might be children would come under age as a protected characteristic, and they of course are protected in the Licensing Act from being sold alcohol because they are under 18. So you're not prejudicing against children by not allowing them to purchase alcohol. However, it's still important to go through the process of an equalities impact assessment to sense check any council policy and how we've got to this point in purpose, and that's why the council does it for all of its policies. So to this end, we reviewed 10 other equalities impact assessments for licensing policies around the country to see what the kind of issues were that they thought that that licensing policy might throw up in terms of perhaps prejudice or impact on protected characteristic groups. So while an example of this is that, so for example, children are protected by the Licensing Act, as I said, we still engage with Hounslow's Children and Young People Services, and they very usefully raised the potential for children to be the target of child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation in the nighttime economy. So we included some text in the policy as a result of that, requesting that licence applicants address any risk to children in these areas over and above the usual risk to children in their operating schedules. And we referred them to Hounslow's safeguarding boards, online risk assessment tools for that. So throughout the policy, we've tried to incorporate ways that licensees can do better due diligence on issues that perhaps weren't there in the 2015 policy. Another area that we saw was, you'll see on page 153, point 4 race. Some boroughs outside of Hounslow had also noted that many of the off licenses and takeaways are small businesses run by Asian entrepreneurs, which is a protected characteristic under race. And because the CIP that's being proposed to make new and varied licenses more difficult to obtain, this may potentially have an impact on that community. The problem is we don't have any statistics, and nor does any council, on the race of licence holders. It's not a legal requirement to ask. So the solution that we arrived at through this process was to write to all premises and personal licence holders in the borough personally, as Andrew referred to with the consultation plan and programme above. And while consultation responses will not include names, respondents will be asked their personal characteristics. So we'll be able to see if there are any disproportionate concerns from that community, but also from any other communities. It has to be said that having been through that process by other councils around the country, it wasn't felt that in any of their equalities impact assessments and subsequent application of that there were problems. It was just that being cautious was more important to ensure that every part of the community felt it could contribute its view on the draft licensing policy. So the summary that we came up with was that the equalities impact assessment demonstrated low risk on protected characteristic groups in the borough, but it was still an important process as much as by ruling out impacts on group as in the absence of any major concerns. It has also influenced the consultation questions and strategy, such as writing to all licensees individually, as I noted earlier. And in summary, the new licensing policy will actually foster good relations and community cohesion, which is one of the requirements of the Equalities Act, by restricting further issues around noise, nuisance and littering, allowing residents and other stakeholders to have a voice in licensing decisions, by protecting children from harm and ensuring that those who are vulnerable are protected, at least as far as is possible within the bounds of the Licensing Act. Thanks very much. Andrew.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, councillors, for your time. And I now ask for the Licensing Committee's approval to consult on the draft statement of licensing policy.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Right, members. First of all, I'm going to invite any questions for the licensing officers. Well, the two of the licensing officers that you may have. So I'll go through the normal procedure and I'll go to call upon Councillor Unsa Chowdhury whether she has any questions of either the officer or the consultant.
Hello, Councillor Unsa Chowdhury here for Austin Spring Grove. My first question is regarding the time taken to complete the review. So when you did it previously, you took 18 days, but on this occasion it was 4. You have said that therefore you cannot compare, but could you tell us why it's a lot less this time round? Also on page 1 to 6. Sorry, do I ask my questions all together or do we respond?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And if one of the officers wants to come back and get the amplification on one of your questions, then they can do. But yeah, ask both. Yeah. Or.
Okay, so my second question is about the extension into Heston. So at the moment, the proposed extension ends on Jersey Road, but on the Heston East Ward side of Jersey Road. Did you investigate going up Jersey Road into Austin and Spring Grove? And did you look at Thornbury Road coming down into Austin and Spring Grove? So at the moment, the current CIP is based up to the Great West Road, and then or south of the Great West Road of Austin Spring Grove, but it doesn't go north. So, and I know there are some shops and things there, and there have been quite a lot of issues. You mentioned HAG, for example, sending you photos of areas within Heston where they've taken photographs. They've also come over to Austin Spring Grove and had a look there, and Ogra again, they've got loads of photos as well and collateral that we could share with you. So was that taken into consideration? And then a question about the consultation. Given the current circumstances, how will we ensure that people who aren't digital, people who are self-isolating, for example, are also able to respond to the consultation? Thanks. I might have some more once people have asked their questions.
Yeah, I'll come back at the end to answer.
Thank you, Councillor. I think for the two cumulative impact questions, I might pass those over to Alistair to answer first. So that'd be the first and the second question there, as he'll have a bit more detail on relating to that specifically.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Councillor Chowdhury. Okay, so the first one about the time we were able to spend observing in the field, it came down to two things. One, sort of in terms of resource and cost issue around that, in the sense that we tried to use the budget in a different way this time. There was more tasks elsewhere. And we felt that 4 days was sufficient. And the reason that it was sufficient this time was because last time was a fact-finding process, trying to find as many days, many locations as possible, because it had never been done before. This time we knew where they were, and it was a case of going back to those locations, seeing if there were still problems there, and then looking at other locations that might have popped up in the area, the CIP, or around the CIP. So it was the fact we'd done most of the groundwork before meant we didn't need as many days to assemble as much evidence as to the presence or absence this time round. In terms of point two, we were sent the evidence from Heston Action Group themselves, and it does include some points up to around Osterley in there. I visited that area, and on my occasions when I was visiting it, there weren't as many visible problems there. However, and clearly the density of premises, licensed premises at the moment, are in those shopping parades, as you mentioned, Jersey Parade and the other 5 or 6 that are within Heston. So the map and the evidence is collected around those areas. However, I would encourage you during the consultation process to submit any additional information that for you, for residents, community groups in your area, and that can then all be taken into consideration. And then maybe it would be a case of considering a redrawing of that proposed boundary in due course once the consultation responses have been received. And that applies to any area. We can only go on the data that we've been given by the council when we were contracted to do it. But if there's other areas that any members of the committee know, or any other councillors, we would encourage them to submit that evidence for consideration during the consultation process. Thanks.
Right.
I'm happy to take on the third question regarding the consultation.
Do you need it repeated?
No, well, just waiting for it to go live at the moment. There we are. So, Councillor, if I could just, was it specifically regarding the consultation and how we're looking to do with people that aren't digital in that regard? So I've been working with the comms team in that, and as well as the web pages and the web consultation, we will also look at a press release. We will look at Hounslow Matters works with the comms team to put it out in Hounslow Matters. There are obviously regular updates. I know this goes back to internet-based ones, but obviously there are updates with regards to regular emails and updates that come out from the council, and if we can include it on those to the residents. And depending on obviously the reopening of areas as well, if we can, we will also be putting copies of paper consultations out, but obviously that's dependent on libraries and the like reopening. We will also, we also have a licensing email address which we can put into the press release, and we can, if required, when we'll look at it, obviously put in a number for the licensing or the licensing telephone. So if anybody does specifically need a paper consultation, we would be able to get those out. But obviously putting out a paper consultation to everybody in the borough, that would be a significant amount of paperwork to get out there to people. So we are looking at non-digital ways to ensure that we are capturing as much of the boroughs as possible. And if there are other ways, I will be working with our comms team on that to try and get it out there to us in as many formats and as many ways as we can.
Right, Andrew. So is that okay, or do you want any follow-up questions?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I go on now to Councillor Giles. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Hi, this is Councillor Giles. I'll wait for the camera. Hello, Councillor Giles here. I have a number of questions relating kind of points throughout the whole of the document. But what I was just going to see is if I might just start and then we can see if there are answers forthcoming. So thank you very much for the time and effort that you've put into updating this document. I understand it's like a 24-page document just for the policy itself. My understanding is that this is to help not just applicants who are looking to apply for licenses or reapply for licenses, but also for those of us who will need to make decisions on those licenses. You can nod, and then I'll I'm having nods, so that's an agreement, I presume. So with that in mind, the whole idea is to make this more user friendly and to make it simple for people to understand. I've got a couple of comments regarding like phrasing and grammar and mistypes that I will email you after this to avoid us going through the document now. I'm going to make a point similar to my previous point, but in the first 7 pages of this document, so there's about 13 different cross-references to different policies or plans or things that not just we as the council have issued, such as the Future Borough Strategy and the Hounslow Local Plan, but obviously other legislation. Is there a way to make this an easy cross-reference for users? Obviously some of those documents ourselves, and I understand it might be simple for IT to go through. There's a few points saying we've got about 4,700 personal licenses have been issued by the council, but in what period? Obvious, and then that's comments. The LPs, so the licensing policy points, they're kind of scattered without the document. Is there or throughout the document? Would there be a way to make this an easy reference for people to just be able to understand exactly what's going on without having to read the whole document? Yes, the core licensing hours. When we met in March 2020 on the 4th, we were given a matrix with a lot of variables for the core licensing hours. Has this been simplified for a reason or a purpose, or are you going to use the discretion to be able to work around those? And then I've got some questions on the I've got some questions on the modal, was it the recommendations? The modal condition, sorry. They are quite straightforward. I was just wondering if there's a way to categorise them. There seems to be 2 different lists, one that has the other one cross-referenced with regarding to points. But if you read through the list, there doesn't seem to be kind of a classification for kind of certain topics, and you kind of have to cross-reference it as a user. And then, Andrew, there's probably a question to your equalities, to the equalities analysis. there's a couple of statements in that have said things for, there was a piece about rough sleeping, but there doesn't seem to be an explicit note in the Hounslow statements of licensing policy draft to how it will become slightly more difficult to access high strength single-use alcohol. And then there was another one about, again, relating to pregnancy and maternity on page 154. Apologies for not giving the page references earlier, but a lot of them are along similar points where obviously we don't encourage licensed press, or it's from related to pregnancy and maternity, and says that the statement of licensing policy for 2020 to 2025 does, however, encourage licensed premises to stock a wide range of non-alcoholic products which broaden the appeal. However, I wasn't able to find where that is explicitly stated within the policy. So I wonder if it's actually been removed. And then just to go back briefly to page 109 and statement 31 under pollution and nuisance, there seems to be an incomplete sentence that says, however, noise coming from, and then there's a table. So I'm just wondering what it's referring to. And there may just be a formatting issue there. So I realise it's a long list. I'm happy to put this down in an email and reply and send it on to you afterwards if there's anything we've missed. But I'm happy to leave the answers to you at the moment. Andrew, you're muted. I'm sorry.
And I'm muted. And now I'm unmuted. There we go. Thank you, Councillor, for those questions. Yes, I mean, if you didn't mind, obviously there was quite a few questions there. If we are able to put them down in an email, we will definitely get back to you and address those in detail. And I'll work with Alistair on any ones that sort of cross over between the cumulative impact work and ourselves with the licensing policy part as well, if you're happy with that.
I'm on mute now. I can copy in, I can send the email and copy in members of the committee so that they're aware of the questions as well.
That does cover my point, Andrew, that if there is something going off committee, can we make sure that members are aware of what it is?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. I will do. I'll make sure all the committee members are copied in.
Are there any things that Councillor Giles asked that you can answer now, or
if there's any specific ones that, sorry. If Councillor Giles, if there are any specific ones of those questions that you asked now that you'd like any answers to, we can.
I don't know, unless any other people were going to ask, any other members of the committee were going to ask questions similar to those I have raised. Yeah, I'm happy to receive these in email form if need be.
Yeah, I would suggest if there are other members of the committee that wish to ask their questions, they go ahead and ask those questions. Anyway, I know I have several areas that Councillor Giles referred to that I would be seeking some clarification on as well. So I would suggest that members ask their questions as they come to them, as they would do. Sorry, I've muted my microphone. I'm saying, are you all right there, Councillor Giles, or can I move on now to?
Yes, move on.
Okay, thank you. Muted again, Councillor. Well, sorry.
You're muted, Vikram.
Oh, can you hear me now? Excellent, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Sibley, for the heads up about the mute button. I would be very keen to hear the response to Councillor Giles' questions, because even though there were quite a few, there were certainly some in there that I was either going to raise or keen to find out the answer to. It's important what Councillor Chowdhury said about the boundaries and how they're drawn up and how they're determined, and I really appreciate this detailed report on all the excellent work that's been taken into it. I can see my ward, Hounslow Heath, is split into two in terms of the current CIP area and the proposed extension. HAG are a fantastic community organisation. Whilst chair of the Housing and Environment Scrutiny Panel, I encourage them to come into Hounslow Heath many a time to do the same work or help create a similar initiative, because community empowerment is fantastic. There was an area within Hounslow Heath, particularly around Hounslow Heath and the licensed premises near them, near the SAR pub, the off licenses near there, which do cause a lot of litter and social, let's just say, antisocial behaviour that could be addressed. So I will feed into the report. And also, it's a really important point about the Equalities Act and its effect on Asian businesses and businessmen and women, because as you can appreciate in Hounslow Heath, we have many of them. So if you need any help with the responses, let me know, but I'm very keen for their voices to be heard in this consultation process as well. So very much what it was about, an additional area in Hounslow Heath that I'll feed into it, and the response to Councillor Giles, and also to highlight the need for Asian businesses to be heard. And if you need any assistance with that, please let me know.
Right, thank you, Vikram. I don't know, was there any comments, Andrew, from what Vikram had to say?
No, just that obviously we would welcome any, as Alistair said previously with regards to the CIP, any additional information and any involvement we can get to obviously ensure that we have the most people involved in the consultation would be fantastic.
I think we need to say that for the cumulative impact policy to be effective, it can't be a blanket system across the borough, because that would detract from the elements that says that, you know, if an area is a problem, then they're the ones that we should concentrate on. But if the more we spread it out, then obviously the more it becomes diffused. But by all means, look at what is in the paper, and if you have specific areas that you think match up with that, then they will be investigated and see where they fall in regards to other areas that we've said are a problem area.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for that. Yeah, just I suppose to add on and what Alistair has said before, that obviously our cumulative impact policy and the cumulative impact assessment does require that full and robust data to be justified. And so we would, you know, Alistair would look into that in detail, and that's what he's done with the extension into the area that it has been proposed at the moment.
Right, okay. I'll move on to Councillor Rajwinder Sidhu. Have you any questions?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Ali. Just one thing I want to add up. In Heston, the areas of Heston which is taken off from the blue proposal, which is the road which goes from Grandford Lane to M4, the road which goes to the service station. On that road, there's a big problem of lorries being parked overnight, and most of the drivers sleep in those lorries, and they drink and they leave the rubbish there. And I think that should be included in this proposed CIA that's left out. I think we should look into that. And the second thing I want to add is regarding Cranford. Cranford is now the ward which is next to the Heathrow, and there is so many new developments, especially hotels. So if there is any studies done in Cranford, if you can forward that, because Cranford is again where litter and antisocial behavior is coming up, and because this policy is for next 5 years, and there will be some developments in that area, if you can look into Cranford as well. Thank you.
Right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Sidhu. Any comments that you want to make on that, Andrew? Or
Yes, so thank you, Councillor Sidhu, for those questions. Specifically regarding those, I'll probably be best for Alistair to talk about those specific sort of 2 areas and what they are. So I might pass over to Alistair with regards to those 2 points.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Councillor Sidhu. Yeah, just in terms of Cranford Lane and the lorry issue, it wasn't something that had been brought to our attention through any of the other data sources that we had. But obviously, from your personal perspective, you've and your residents have clearly got problems with that. You're noticing it on an everyday basis. So what I would say is, can you send information and get in touch with myself and Andrew as part of the consultation process, and then we will relook at that area, look at data to try and understand better what the nature of that problem might be and whether there is grounds for including it within the cumulative impact policy area. Is that something that you'd be happy with? I'll come back to you in a minute and you can say yes or no. And the Heathrow, the proposal with Heathrow, I think that's slightly more difficult to come up with a specific policy of, because we're sort of then trying to map into the future, and we can only go on the data that we've got at the moment. However, what I would say around cumulative impact policy is, unlike the licensing policy, which has to be reviewed every 5 years, the previous government, in its wisdom, decided that it should be every 3 years that you do your cumulative impact assessment. The idea being that things change pretty fast in some locations, some cities, and so therefore I think businesses in particular were concerned that in 5 years, and residents as well, and councillors, in 5 years things could have changed pretty rapidly. And so you're not prevented from looking at redoing your cumulative impact assessment in 2 years or 3 years, because you have to have done it within 3. So it's much more responsive than having to wait 5 years. Not that you have to wait 5 years, but pretty much every local authority does wait 5 years to do its licensing policy update. So I think the cumulative impact is more responsive, and you can include that Heathrow bit, but I'll definitely get back in touch with you around Cranford Lane and the lorries, and you can submit some further evidence as part of the consultation. I think it's really important, as Andrew has said, that this is a draft consultation policy and nothing is fixed in stone. It's sort of most of the way there, and it's based on best practice and best local data and engagement with a whole range of officers and stakeholders so far, but it is still open for change to be much more nuanced and reflect much better the borough and the situation that we find on it. And that sort of applies to Councillor Gerwell's point about Hounslow Heath. And so we can look at a similar arrangement there, Councillor Gerwell. And I was just going back to Councillor Giles, your points. I think most of them were about how we might better frame the policy in terms of making it easier to use, more cross-referenceable, and some of the typos, which are all sort of easy to do things, which I think will make a real improvement to it. The one point I thought you might want, or I might be able to comment on, was simplifying that matrix, which I had originally showed you, of potential core hours in different locations. And that was an example from another borough. And I think in discussion with other stakeholders that we'd had along the way, we felt that it was probably too complex for Hounslow, and that the core hours, as suggested, were a better fit for you as a borough. Okay, so I hope that's useful for now.
right, okay, can I move on? Councillor Smith, have you anything to ask and questions?
The only thing I wanted to ask that hasn't been asked already is there a reason why the core hours start so early? Because I think most of the licensing panels I've been on, we usually tend to start hours around 10. I don't know how much need there is for 8 AM starts, or have I missed something? Sorry, it just seemed awfully early to have it as part of the core hours and might make people think that that's you know, the right time to start.
Right.
Okay, shall I take that one? Andrew can also comment if required. Yeah, I think that's a good point. We've used core hours. What I did was I reviewed all the other relevant London Borough policies that have used core hours, and that was fairly typical. Some are a bit later. It is a suggested time for core hours for consultation, and obviously the idea is to get initially your feedback, but then the public's feedback, business, etc., on those hours. And of course, you're perfectly entitled subsequent as a committee to say, we think, based on the evidence that we've heard back from consultation, that this is too early and that we should move it forward slightly. And I'll be preparing a report along with Andrew based on all of that consultation to submit to you councillors for your decision to do that. So at the moment, that's a suggested time, but of course, people can comment and suggest that they feel it's too early or too late, or should apply on different days at different times. That's all reasonably open for discussion, but obviously core hours are based on generally the fact that we're trying to achieve a balance between residents having a good night's sleep and people being able to go out and get a drink and go and see a live gig or whatever at a certain reasonable time. So that's balance that you always have to strike as a committee, and we try and strike that in the policy, but it's obviously open to consultation feedback.
Right. Is that okay, Councillor Smith? Yeah, you have any other questions?
No, but yeah, I mean, you know, early morning drinking is something that residents regularly complain about. It can be an issue, and yeah, I can see, you know, we've got flexibility either way, so I just thought it might be preferable to make it a later start for the core hours, and then people can always argue why they should be allowed to sell alcohol earlier, I suppose is how I was looking at it. Okay, thanks. otherwise yeah, it's all good.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Smith. Well, it's up to me now. I'm going to come back to core hours because this is new and novel for us, but I agree with the point that Councillor Smith made, that certainly in all of the representations, or most of the representations we've had over the last couple of years, we have been looking for starts not before 10 o'clock, and I personally would like to see that put in there, because I think the important thing is that the core hours are really for us to show that there is transparency with the way in which we're going forward with our policy, and if we make that too wishy-washy, then it will lose that transparency. I certainly am quite happy with the way they are, and we set that towards being, if you like, the norm. And as Councillor Smith said, it is up to people who think they've got special cases to argue outside that to actually do that. There is one other issue that comes into the core hours, which is the situation about the nighttime economy, which I think the core hours goes a long way to sort of doing something about it, but it leaves almost leaves a gap between what we see as the nighttime economy and the normal pub business sort of thing. It's my feeling, and the nighttime economy is not one to be chosen by licensing alone. In fact, I believe that we need to be guided by planning and by public health on where we should be with the nighttime economy. And I would like to see that, just as we're talking about core hours being a guide, I would like to see us looking at identification of what the nighttime economy is in terms of its area, and we should be saying certain areas of the borough are okay for a nighttime economy, but there are certain other parts of the borough that are not okay, and therefore we've got transparency when we're taking on licensing. If somebody's looking to put an all-night club in Councillor Smith Street, I'm sure she would say that's not an appropriate place for the all-night economy, and therefore it would deter applicants from actually asking that question in the first place, that they actually do look at proper places for a proper activity. But I think it's something that is wider than licensing, and we need a lead from public health and from planning on that one. Other questions? I'm okay. I think everybody else has picked up much of what I was going to ask on questions. It's just that particular area around the core hours. I see it as a very important aspect, and one that as we could have used over the past years. It would have been much better to have a statement like that out there that we could actually use, and that would enable us to have applicants coming to the committee, to the panels, who are actually already briefed on what it is that they want, with an argument and that they can make, that would be, to actually come and say, right, this is the reason. I take on the point that what I think Andrew was saying, that these core hours would not be an argument within the cumulative impact area. Was that correct, what you were saying?
Yeah, yes, Councillor, it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so we would address that in a different way. That would be part of their argument, because in a cumulative impact area, then it is up to the applicants to come along with an argument that says, this is the reason I want a license here, and I want these hours, and then therefore we can then look at it in that vein. Right. Okay. So before I move on, I don't know, have any of the members any further questions that they'd like to ask at this stage? No, you're all seeing. Yes, and so I can see that. Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I just would like to support Councillor Smith's statement about the core hours. And that's something that I also noticed, and I'm really pleased that Councillor Smith has brought up. I think that's really important to consider, and I just wanted to offer my support.
Thank you, Unsa. Any other members wish to make any comments or questions? Right. Okay. So I think we've covered a lot, and there is a lot there, and I'm really grateful to you all for going into all of the 100 and whatever pages there were there. It's pretty heavy stuff. Fortunately, we only have to do this at maximum once a year, get through that sort of quantity. So it's something that is obviously very, very important, but I apologise for it having been a big lump in this sort of circumstance. So what I'd like to do then is to now ask if there is a formal proposal to accept this report. Is there a member to?
I'll propose.
Who was that? Who was that? That was
Karen.
Karen. Okay, sorry, Karen. I can't see your lips moving. It's the sync. It's gone. Is there somebody seconding it?
Yeah, I'll second, Unsa.
Thank you, Unsa. Right, can I then go through the list, and I should remind members that should only vote if you've heard the debate. I think you've all been there all the time that I've been watching. So if you could go along, I'll call you out. Excuse me, one by one. So I start with Councillor Unsa Chowdhury.
Just to confirm that I have been present and I agree, or I am for.
Okay, thank you, Answer. Councillor Giles.
I'm Councillor Giles, and I can confirm that I have been present for the whole of the debate on this item and am for it.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Move on to Councillor Vikram Goel.
Oh, I am having slight IT issues. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Sorry.
I can hear you.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay with my Teams application there, but I can confirm I was here for the entirety of the debate and I'm for it.
Thank you, Councillor Goel. I now move on to Councillor Rajwinder Sidhu.
I, Councillor Rajwinder Sidhu, confirm that I've been present throughout the debate and I'm for the proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sidhu. And now to Councillor Karen Smith. Right, you're live.
I'm Karen Smith. I confirm that I was present for the whole of the debate and I am in favour of the proposal.
Thank you very much, Karen. I now move to myself, Councillor Richard Foote, as Chair. I confirm that I've been present all of the time. And I would say that I'm in favour of the report, and while saying it, thank the officers for the enormous amount of work that they put in preparing it, and including that, Ali Turnham as our guest tonight, but also the amount of work he's put in. Thank you very much, all of you. Right. So that's right. The outcome of that was unanimous. So I now move on. And onto agenda item 5. I've had no notification of any urgent matters. So if anything's come up in the last hour and a half, please speak now. If not, we'll move on. I think I've already said I pay thanks to the members and the licensing officers and the ICT officers who've all tried and made this smooth. I did see comments coming from the public following the planning meeting last week, which were very complimentary. I don't know quite at the moment if we know how many members of the public were watching. I believe in planning there were 27 members of the public watching the meeting. We'll no doubt find out later on how many were watching us. And that only leaves me to really close the meeting. So if I ask the members to just hang on a short while whilst the IT people can close the thing down properly.